Hi everybody, my name is Tony Thomas and I was the pastor of the Lakota Christian Church from 1989 through 1994. And I want to thank Sean for the chance to speak to you. He reached out and asked me if I'd send a little message to you guys, and I want to congratulate you on your soon-to-be move into your new 1,100 seat worship center. I think that's really, really awesome. To give you some idea of how far Lakota Christian Church Center Pointe has come over the years, when I preached my trial sermon in 1989, there were 30 adults who voted for me, and the vote was 25-5. And so the very first poor decision that the leadership made was going ahead and bringing me to town. But we were really glad that they did. We made a lot of really wonderful friends. When we moved to Lakota, we met at the Lakota High School. In fact, we were back when Lakota had only one high school. And we were there in 1992 when we won the state tournament up in Columbus. That was really, really exciting. And then eventually we moved to what was then called the freshman building. And when we moved away from Westchester, that's where we were worshiping at the time. As I said, I was voted on by 30 adults in 1989, and when we left in 1994, we averaged 187 in attendance. Our high day was 231, which I know doesn't sound like very many, but at the time that was really, really exciting for a new church. We're just so excited to see what God has done at Center Pointe and the people that you are reaching. To give you some idea of how big of a church you have, when I retired 2 years ago, I retired from a church with a membership of 1,100. You're moving into a facility that will seat 1,100 one time. So we're really excited to see what God has done through you over the years. We want to wish you well. One of the things we said back when we raised money was we prayed, may all who come behind us find us faithful. And after all these years, I'm so glad that God has been faithful and you have been faithful. I congratulate you. I wish you well. I know that Sean will continue to do a great work, and we just want God to bless you. Thank you.
What could God do with 140 people setting up chairs in a rented school cafeteria for church each Sunday morning? Well, look around you, Center Pointe Church, and you'll see what God did with that group of 140 people meeting in the old school cafeteria. Through the years, God has blessed the ministry there and your outreach into that community. And some of the happiest years that Pat and I have spent in the ministry were our years there with you in the early days of Lakota Christian Church and, of course, now Center Pointe Church. We remember them well, and you had great leaders with a lot of vision in those days who brought the church to where it is today. We think back on men like Larry Abernathy and Doug Clenworth, Ron Davis, Brian Southerly, and through their leadership and God's blessing, that little group of 140 grew to over 1,000 in about 5 years and through 2 building programs. And so today, I'm especially thankful to your pastor, Sean, for inviting me to greet you on the occasion of the dedication of your latest building. I say latest building and not last building because I know that God will continue to bless you and your influence there in that community in southwestern Ohio. Know that you have our prayers and our blessings, and that across the miles and across the years, we carry a piece of you in our hearts even today. So from Pat and Barry McCarty and our family, we give you greetings and blessings on this day. God bless you.
Hello, Center Pointe Church. My name is Stephen Sams, and I was lead pastor at Center Pointe from 2001 through 2009. And when I think back on those years, I think about growth, both as a church and also personally. I think about the many people that were baptized into Christ in those years and just watching Jesus Christ just radically transform life after life. I think about dear friends I think about times of celebration and fun, like the time that Miss Tammy made me eat a cicada to support missions for children, and later a live worm. Those were good times. And I remember the time when I hit your pastor, Sean, with a golf ball, even though he was hiding behind a golf cart because he knew that my shot might be wayward, and it hit him anyway. It was really a miracle, actually. I think about times of challenge as well, including 9/11. My very first week at the office was the week of 9/11 when we mourned together as a church, and we also bonded together forever. I think about the joy of serving with my sister Sherry on our worship staff, who now worships her Savior face to face in heaven. And I think about the support that you gave us as we launched a new church called Access Church in Mason and then also Middletown. And we will be forever grateful for your support for that. Today, I celebrate with you the accomplishment of building the facility that you are about to enter. And that is a great accomplishment. But I want to remind you that sometimes churches have a tendency to think that that is the end goal. And you know that it's not. It's just a tool. God's used facilities in the past, he'll use them in the future. But the goal is that we would do what Jesus said, to love God and to love people. And so my prayer for you is that this facility would enable you to help more people come to know Christ in an authentic relationship, to love God more, and that you would advance the gospel of Jesus Christ in our generation so that more and more people would become his disciples, and that you together would grow in love with him and with one another. So God bless you all in this time of the life of Center Pointe Church. And as you embark on this new chapter, I just pray that God would continue to do wonders among you.
Well, first, I just want to thank you guys for your willingness to come and just kind of share your journey with Center Pointe, formerly known as Lakota Christian Church. And so I think the best place for us to start is really right at the beginning with you guys. So you guys had just moved here. Well, it didn't look like it does today, right? There wasn't a church on every corner.
There was nothing out here. When we drove out here, I said, Glenn, where are you taking me?
Yeah, it was a long journey up here. It was about 26 miles from where we used to live. We had friends moving out here, and we decided to come out here and look. And finally, when we settled in, we, of course, had to find a church. We thought it would be Christ Church at Mason because Jan's brother was senior minister there and preaching.
Small world.
That was the furthest church from our home. We went there, and we went to Forestdale and Fairfield. And we ended up putting our membership in at Fairfield. It was similar to our Western Hills church, about the same in size and congregation. So Jan went down to a women's retreat, I guess, at the seminary, and got wind that CEF was thinking about starting a church out here in the Westchester area. So you want to talk a little bit about that, or do you remember?
Well, I was really excited because, to drive far away with two little kids to church, we were spoiled. We lived in the city where there were several churches within a mile or two of our house, and to come out here and there aren't any Christian churches. So,
yeah. So we were contacted by Larry Holmes, and he came out to our home, and he just talked about starting a new church out here. And we said, yeah, we might be interested. Where are you meeting? He says, well, how about here? And that was at our home. So
close. That was close.
We didn't know we were it, but tag, that's the way it worked. Once we got a core group together, we really did kind of meet in our home for church and assembly and Bible study and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And as it grew, we had to expand a little bit. So it worked out. It was an experience that I wouldn't necessarily want to go through again at this stage in life, but it was very, very enjoyable.
So how did you guys get involved in?
Well, I think we first heard about it actually, I thought it was in the newspaper. In the local paper, they were advertising that there was a new church starting up. And I remember that we were meeting at the country club, Becca Ridge Country Club.
Okay.
And so we were previously attending Mason Church of Christ and felt like, that it's not too far to drive, but we wanted to get something a little closer, and a new church sounded intriguing. And so we thought, well, let's see what this is like. So we met out at the country club, and we started attending from there because basically we saw what we liked. And I think mostly it was the fact that they had the makings that we were looking for in a new church. And by that, I mean, they were creative. They were really outside the box, which was a new concept back in '87. And I think that's what attracted us to that. And they didn't have a lot of programs, but it was like, you build it. And so we liked the idea of that because this whole community was like, you build it. And so this is what attracted us to that, don't you think?
Correct.
Yeah. So that's we started meeting at the country club.
So leadership decides we need to find a permanent home because you guys you were bringing in the stuff every week. It felt like forever. And Larry, as I understand it, you were on the search team, right?
Land Search Committee. Right.
The Land Search Committee. So what all that entail?
Basically, about 3 or 4 of us getting into a van and driving around on Saturdays looking at land. And there was a lot
you
of it
didn't
to
look
see.
on the internet?
No, afraid not. But so that's what we did. We would drive around and we'd see all these farms. And as the township was growing out here, Westchester and Liberty townships, then these farms were turning into subdivisions of houses. And we thought, well, we better get into some farmland or it's not going to be available. So we just kept driving around and saying, okay, this is a good one. We'd take pictures of it and we'd talk about it. And then we'd meet and in groups at our house and Glenn and Janet's house and a couple of times at the church as it was at Lakota High School. And we said, okay, we need to find some land that would accommodate a traffic flow that would attract people. It can't be back in the forest, in the woods someplace. It's got to be accessible to the highways that were there and what we predicted would be there in the future. We had picked out 2 places and somebody came up with the idea that said, let's look at this from the air. So we went over to that little airport outside of Fairfield, and we rented a plane, and 3 of us and the pilot. And so we shot video and took pictures, which became slide projections, and from the plane, and to fly over it. And then when we made the presentation, we could say, you can see the land now, you can see the highways, and everybody got a really good visual presentation of what it was like. And then from that, I guess we would build our vision, what we wanted it to be like. Then the last choice was, okay, now can we go to this guy, whoever owns this land, and see if we can buy it? As I remember, the first thing we did, we had a kind of a congregational meeting and said, we did our presentation, we said, these are our top choices. Let's all pray now for direction. What should we do now? And then we made the next step. And when we selected where it is now, we said, let's pray and let's pray for a good answer and can we afford it and all those kind of things. So we did that. And then we met with the owner. And we went over to Fairfield, to his office, Clinton.
David Clinton.
David Clinton, that's right. And met with him and our land search committee and the minister and a group of us met with him. And after having prayed and went to him and said, we want to propose this to you. And I think we also prayed at the time, and I was maybe a little surprised that we would come in there and be so bold, but this is what we wanted to do, and we felt led to do it. And he agreed to sell us the land with one stipulation, as I remember, was we had to take all 12 acres. We couldn't just take this corner property. It had to be all of it or nothing. And that's the way I remember it.
So the combined total is 16 acres,
Correct.
right?
Right.
So this
16.
is 12 acres,
Right.
and then there was another 4.
Right. Okay.
And the price I heard, Glenn, was $20,000.
Yeah, it was. You couldn't do that today.
No, that'll buy you about an eighth of an acre today, maybe, if you're lucky.
So there was an announcement made about some kind of master planning, which that's what I do so all the time. And I walked up to Tony after service one day and I said, well, if you want me, I'll be more than happy to be involved. And he said, great. And I don't know how long it took after that. There was a master plan team put together. I think there were 4 or 5 people maybe. Anyway, and we met and just talked about what things would look like and how big things could be. And I said, can't we get a square piece of property, not a long rectangular piece of property? No, too late for that. And it just started from there. And then, like, what does phase 1 look like? And to give people an idea, the first building was 2 stories, 14,000 square feet, and we got it done for $65 a foot.
So let me go to Mr. and Mrs. Weinberger. You guys came in when they were meeting in the high school. Is that right?
Well, so we were newly married and had just moved into the area, and we're looking at churches and going to a few churches and didn't really find one that clicked with us. And there was a sign out in the corner of the property that said "Future Home of Lakota Christian Church," and it said currently meeting at Lakota High School. So we said, let's try it. So we went down to Lakota High School and we sat through the service and we thought, oh, that was okay, but that really wasn't what we were looking for. And we found out that it was Lord of Life Lutheran that was meeting at Lakota High School. And Lakota Christian Church had moved to the Lakota Freshman Building. She called the church office. They said, oh, sorry, we need to change the signs. So yeah, we started going when it was at what is now Ridge Junior High.
So our first Sunday, when we walked in the door, the pastor was at the door and he said, you must be the Weinbergers.
Yeah.
Because we were the people that had
travels
called and
fast.
gone to the wrong place.
That's a smaller place.
Yeah.
And we, so we were 23, 24 years old. And honestly, the first year or two that we were here was probably the most traumatic years of our lives. We were just newly married, just moved into a new house, just started new jobs. And Laura's mom contracted cancer, ultimately passed from that cancer. We had a miscarriage. We had a difficult pregnancy. So we just had a run of just really difficult things in life. And I'm always emotional with these things. But I'm thinking about, you asked the question, what made this place special and what made it last? And, 2 of the first faces that we saw when we got here were these 2.
Yep.
But they loved us and cared for us from the day we walked in the door. And that's how I've always felt in this place. And I remember when Tony Thomas, the first pastor, decided he was leaving. He decided he was going to have a career change. And I remember writing him a letter. We'd only been here, I don't know, a year at the time. We hadn't been here for very long. Mm-hmm. And I remember writing him a letter, number 1, appreciating him for what he had done. But number 2, just reaffirming that what he had helped build here was why we were staying. Not because he was this brilliant preacher or, because, he was the person I came for every Sunday. It was because he had helped to build a place that was lasting and that was committed to one another and loving and caring. And we felt like that for, it's almost 30 years now. So.
You know what? I think one of the awesome things was because we didn't have a building, we met in each other's homes so much. So we had fundraisers in each other's homes. We had a fundraiser at our house. It was the First Friday Forfeit Fund Fellowship. And we had 80, people, children and adults in our little 2-story or little bi-level house that we had. We had 80 people. Yeah, we were using the garage for the kids.
Where they belong.
It was so much fun. And nobody cared that we were packed like sardines. I mean, if there had been a fire marshal all over us.
We would have cared.
But I think that also made us be closer was because we spent so much time in each other's homes.
We've got yard signs that we've provided folks to take and put in their front yard. And I'm walking through my neighborhood and I'm seeing signs about our grand opening. And the top of the sign says, "See what's next." So, what do you guys? What do you hope for, dream of, pray for? What's next here?
I believe this is home plate for a whole lot of other things. And I think there's a lot of churches this size that have satellite campuses in the region that they're in. I think anybody who pays attention to other smaller churches, a lot of them are failing. They're not doing well. So there's no reason that this church can't be bigger than this 12-acre piece of property. And I believe that's where we wind up. That's what I've always thought.
We've got a beautiful new building. It's really cool to see, but the biggest thing is when people walk through those doors, do they meet Jesus with skin on? And if they meet Jesus with skin on, then it can only grow. And when we're outside of here, in the grocery store, in our neighborhoods, if they meet Jesus with skin on, then who knows what God will do here, but it'll be something big.
There's a piece of scripture just came to me like 2 minutes ago, and I can't quote where it came from, but it's, "To whom much has been given, much will be required." And I think this is an example of how much has been given. And in the state of the world today, I think this is what I would see going to the next season, because much is going to be required. That's my personal opinion. And this church is in a position to help be the anchor, and the anchor holds. And that's what's, I think, necessary in this community. We've been away from this church for a while, and I think this year God called us back. And I don't know why this year, but he did. But it's at this time in our lives, I think, and in this time in the world, that we need to be looking out and saying the anchor needs to hold. And this church has been given the much, and now the much is required. So there's a lot of work to do. It is unfinished, and there's a lot of work ahead. And this is a great tool. This is what it is. It's a great tool for facilitating that and building on, in my opinion, and having been away from it for a number of years, the spirit that was leading this church in 1987, and that spirit is what's brought it this far. And my opinion, I think that's what's going to take it forward.
That was a fun conversation for me. It was about an hour long, and we got to show you about 15 minutes of it. And what encouraged me most about that conversation was to hear how much the church prayed over this piece of property and how obedient they were to the Spirit's leading. And listen, the best way that we can honor them is to continue in that same posture. This posture of prayer and this posture of obedience. And so we've been in this series all summer called The Unfinished Life, where we've been walking through the book of Ephesians. And as Paul lands the plane in Ephesians in chapter 6, he wraps this letter up by laying a foundation of prayer. And so there's a war that's going on outside these walls. And Paul says in chapter 6 that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Our struggle is not against other people. Now, the enemy wants us to think that our enemy is other people.
And so we spend time fighting with other people, and we are so divided right now, as divided as we've ever been. But our enemy is the spiritual forces in the heavenly realm, and Paul tells us how to defend ourselves against the enemy's attacks. He gives us 7 things that make up the full armor of God in verses 10 through 17. But there's one more weapon, or 6 things in verses 10 through 17. But there's one more weapon that often gets overlooked, and it's in verse 18. And it's because verse 18 looks like a separate thought, but it's actually just a continuation of verse 17. Here's what he says: "And pray. And pray. Pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests." We can't live the unfinished life on our own power. Without prayer, we are finished. Not in a good way. Without prayer, we are finished walking this journey. Without prayer, we are finished as a church. And that's why Paul saves the most important instructions for the end. To pray in the Spirit means that our prayers are centered around God's will instead of our own wants. It means that we're praying for God's kingdom to grow instead of our own. It means that there are more you statements in our prayers than there are me, my, and I statements. Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. God, this is all about you. This is not about me. That's what it means to pray in the Spirit. And we're to pray on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. Prayer is not a last resort when nothing else is working. That is not what prayer is. That's not the pattern of prayer that we see in the first century followers. If you read through the book of Acts, they don't just pray when life is difficult. They lived this life of prayer. Prayer was transformational. To breathe, for those believers, was to pray. And so praying on all occasions means that there is no occasion that's off limits to God. When you begin praying on all occasions, you are living in communion with your Heavenly Father. You're not just relegated to praying at a certain time or a certain place in a certain way. No, you become aware that God is always with you, and so you're just having these conversations throughout the day. Paul tells the Thessalonian church to pray without ceasing. It just means that we have such an authentic, dependent relationship on our Father that there's just a continuous conversation throughout the day. And he says, with this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Be alert means be watchful. Be engaged enough in the battle that you know when the enemy is trying to steal, kill, and destroy. And guess what? That is all the time. We cannot afford to be spiritually lazy. We can't afford to let our guard down. And don't just pray for your stuff, right? Don't just pray for your needs. Pray for other people. Like, we are in this battle together, and so we need to pray for one another. Pray for your small group members. Pray for our staff here at church. Pray for our elders as they lead. I want to challenge you today. If you're not already, to start praying daily for this church. Like, every day in your prayer time, that you would lift Centerpoint Church up before our Father. Our heart, the heart of our leadership, is that this would be a praying place. Like, we want to see God do miracles in this place. We want to see people find freedom here. We want to see angry people find peace here. We want to see lonely people find belonging here. We want to see broken people find healing here. We want to see broken families find reconciliation here. And that's going to take more than me preaching. It's going to take all of us praying together. And that's why Paul closes out by asking for personal prayer for himself as he preaches the gospel, because preaching without prayer is powerless and pointless. Preaching without prayer is powerless and pointless. Here's what he says, verse 19. Pray also for me that whenever I speak, words may be given me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly as I should. This entire journey that we've been on as a church has been about that. So that we could fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. We built a new worship center that we'll step into in just a minute so that we could fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel to more and more people. Many of you made sacrifices over the last 2 years. You gave up vacations. You gave up upgrades. Some of you gave up retirement funds so that we could fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. And here's what the gospel is. The gospel is freedom and peace and belonging and healing and reconciliation and light and truth and grace. That passage at the end of the video from Acts 20 where Paul says, listen, I don't care what happens to me as long as I can finish the work that the Lord has given me to do. Those words in Acts 20 were spoken to the elders from the Ephesian church, the book we've been studying. It was his goodbye to them. It was his farewell to them. He would never see them again. He was going to Jerusalem. Then he would go on to Rome where he would be executed. And he says to them in his final statement to them, I don't care what happens to me as long as I can finish the work. And this is the work right here. This is the work. This is what Paul was all about. This is what we are all about. It's what we've been about from the very first gathering in the living room of Glenn and Janet Snyder. It's what we will be about until Jesus comes back. And so Paul's ending of Ephesians is fitting for the beginning of our new season here at Center Pointe. So we're going to take a little field trip now. So we're going to start this journey by walking over to our new worship center. And so here's what you're going to do. You're going to file out these doors in a somewhat orderly fashion. We're going to walk up the sidewalk. You're going to walk into the new worship center. And as you go in, somebody's going to hand you a card. And that card's going to have one of these words on it. And I'll tell you what to do with that when we get over there. And you're going to pick up communion. And we're going to take communion in that new space. So for those of you who are watching online, hang with us for just a minute. And we'll see you over in our new space. You guys are dismissed. I'll see you up in the new room.